Good morning. I'm Paul Coulter here with the Orlando Tech Community Live. We've rebranded and we're reconcepted, bringing to you the best and baddest of Orlando and Central Florida. Today, we're going to look at 0 to 1. Let's get traction. There's so many of you entrepreneurs out there that are looking to turn that big idea into a big success. And we've got some great experts here on our roundtable this morning that are going to talk about how they've taken their ideas, converted that to traction, and scaled it to 8, 9, 10 figures. So we're excited to have a great roundtable and a great conversation this morning on 0 to 1. First off, we have Nick Walsh with NV Labs. Nick has taken a software company, exited, sold it to another major player in the ed tech community. And we're excited to have you here, Nick. Why don't you introduce yourself just briefly?
Thanks, Paul. Yeah, so my name's Nick Walsh. I'm managing partner at NV Labs. We're a software shop that started here in Central Florida about 15 and a half years ago. We work with startups and a lot of organizations that are trying to be one for a little bit. So enterprise companies that need to get from a napkin idea into kind of V1 or a prototype or something like that. So along the way, because we have a lot of developers, designers, product specialists, we also have produced some products of our own. You alluded to Code School, which was the biggest of those. It was a learn to code platform we started back in the 2010, 2011 timeframe, and we bootstrapped it over the next 4 to 5 years into a company that we sold to Pluralsight for about $36 million or so in a cash and stock deal. So yeah, that's more or less our bag.
Excellent. We're excited to have you here. Thanks so much. Next up, we have Louis Romo. Louis has exited a health tech company. He's scaled that, was actually on ground zero in New York City when COVID hit with the pandemic. So he's got some interesting stories to tell about us. And then he currently manages a large e-commerce portfolio. So Louis, welcome.
Thanks, Paul. Thanks for having us. Hello to everybody. Just a quick intro about myself. I'm a husband. I'm a father, recent father of a 3-month-old son, technologist, an entrepreneur, and I like to focus on strategy. So right now, what I'm doing is building out a portfolio of different brands, having fun doing that. And my previous company was mainly in the healthcare technology space. So at the time, and I think now I stopped counting, I probably have 30 or 40 patents internationally, Canada, Japan, China, Australia, Germany, several countries in Germany. And so, I bring a lot of product focused, I would say, skill sets in terms of how to commercialize something and bring it to life, kind of talking about 0 to 1. And then once you cross that milestone, then it's okay, how do you scale to the different layers of revenue in a competitive, dynamic environment? And so I'm happy to be on the call. Looking forward to our discussion.
And we're glad to have you migrate to Central Florida over the past few years and have your wealth of knowledge and expertise to our community. So thanks and welcome. And then Richard Lloyd. Richard has IPO'd a number of companies, former SVP for KKR, started out actually as an Army Ranger, so elite of the elite, and done quite a bit of international business and M&A throughout Eastern European region, Africa, Middle East. And so we're glad to have you here, Richard.
Thank you, Paul. Thank you. It's a pleasure to be here. I've been in war zones, boardrooms, and handled billion-dollar negotiations. So I appreciate that intro. As an Army Ranger, then investment banker, now private equity strategist and AI investor. I've scaled, in my IPO, scaled to 9-figure valuations, executed probably more than 50 international acquisitions. The best sprint I ever did was 18 in 18 months. Rolled up distressed assets during the GFC, the global financial crisis. Currently leading a few AI-driven financial innovations, some startups, some in sustainability credits, others in global fertility. Also authoring my first book, which I'm super excited about, and it really explores how AI technology are really affecting all of us, but in particular our children, and how it's reshaping the world we live in. Not just those things, but how the software and the hardware really comes together and really impacts quite a bit of our lives. I mean, many more ways than we realize. And that's really the scary part, is that it's one thing to accept a compromise or something, but when we don't even realize it's happening, it affects our lives in ways we don't really understand. And currently, I influence through my consulting, I influence about 72 billion globally. That's advising sovereign wealth funds, Fortune 500s, some high growth tech startups, and that can be on capital strategy, AI, market expansion. So excited to be here, and thank you all for the time.
Excellent. We're glad to have you here, and we've got a really great crew, as you can tell. This concept of 0 to 1 and getting initial traction is something that only 9% of companies ever get from that base level of the idea stage up to $1 million in revenue, right? And Peter Thiel, in his book, which is kind of a tip of the hat, it said, brilliant thinking is rare, and courage is even in shorter supply than genius. And so, it must take courage to get traction, to go out there with your great idea, to take that to market. But when we step back, there are kind of 4 components that I'd like to look at today. Initially, right, there are the tactical, the process portion that we must take a look at to get that initial traction. Number 2, I want to understand, with all of this juggle, there's so many different priorities, right? How do you prioritize your time, your money, your resources, your capital, all of that to get the initial traction? I think we'll look at that perseverance, that courage that Peter was talking about. And then ultimately, it's about putting together the right team. So just straight out of the gate, Nick, I wanted to tip it to you. How did you approach that initial idea coming with Code School or any of the ideas that you've come to business with?
Sure. We lucked out in that at Envy, kind of a core value since the beginning has been education. And so the idea was kind of the lightning strike of applying that. A number of our kind of founders and developers would go to conferences and essentially teach the craft, the things that we were doing for our clients. They would go and hold workshops. And so pretty quickly they found out they're spending most of their time helping people set up their computers or doing everything except teaching. And so the idea to create something where folks go online and have the platform there and have this kind of learn to code in the browser experience came quickly and was validated quickly. And so it was also easier because, effectively we were the client or we were the customer. So creating kind of the first version of that, we went from this idea and then this thing that was one of our core values into let's just try a free course. We created the course, we ran it locally, we were running meetups back then in town. So we had a bunch of folks from Orlando come out and try it. And we launched it and the community loved it, ate it up, all the virality you could hope for. And so that quickly told us that we had something. And so really it was just a progression from there. We went from free course to paid courses. But they were one-offs because we were worried that it was too soon to start a subscription service and really commit the resources to doing this on a recurring basis each month because of how long it took us to make each one of these courses. But after a few of those hit and did well, we knew, okay, let's keep going and keep making this a thing that we're committing more and more of our expertise from the consulting side into the product. We were very symbiotic back then, and I'm sure that'll come up later as far as perseverance and strategy goes. But it really comes down to tacos. I think we talked about this a bit. We were doing these meetups. We were trying to validate that these courses were working and that folks were learning something. And the easiest thing in the world is to go to Gringos and have them cater an event on short notice. And if you provide tacos, people show up. And so those were our beta testers, and that helped us figure out this kind of right cadence for growth and making sure that we are keeping ourselves on track each month to feed them tacos and see how the course was doing.
I thought you meant total advertising cost of sales. I didn't know you meant real tacos.
No, we're not throwing in any acronyms.
I was waiting for that analogy. Yeah.
No, that's awesome. I mean, you get the people there, you get the validation, and right, it's that initial traction, that initial validation that can make or break a company. Lewis, you want to talk about right place, right time, and your journey of getting there for that initial traction?
Yeah. As I look back, and even currently, I don't think an entrepreneur's job is really to understand where they are in the marketplace, and it could be from is the market ready for your solution? Is it primed? Is there a pressure point? Is there demand? And then at the same time, you have to kind of look, over your shoulder to your competitors to see where they are in that similar space. Are you better? Are you the same? Or are you just like completely different and approaching it in a completely different angle? So when I talk to an entrepreneur and they can't describe where they are in the marketplace clearly, I would say that I know that they haven't really done their homework to validate where they're kind of standing in the arena. And so that's something that's critical. You got to look sideways, a little bit backwards, and then look forwards when you're creating something. And then, to Nick's point, I think when they saw a little bit of that traction, and they were worried because it cost something to build whatever they were building, but they kind of doubled down because they saw some interest. I think those are the critical times where a lot of entrepreneurs kind of like shy away because it's getting a little bit too hectic, or there's actual demand. Like, you built a company, you got customers, now you have to go to work, you have to do more work. So I think that's important to understand where you are in the marketplace. And then if it's going to take you X number of years to either commercialize or bring your first product to market, are you going to be too late? Is still going to be enough time? Because you really want to capture market share. And if your strategy is not to capture market share, what's going to be your unfair advantage to compete or attract customers or attract an acquirer? And so I think those are all critical points.
Yeah, I think Peter also in that book talks about monopoly is the that ideal state, the condition for every successful business. How do you carve out your own little monopoly within that niche or within that initial traction option, right? Richard, any thoughts on getting that initial traction out of the gate, building on what Lewis said there?
No, it's. I think a lot of times, well, he's absolutely right. I think that it comes down to problem solving versus product building early on, and really listening, finding that tribe, finding that community, but realizing it's got to be small, but listening for clear signal, and staying focused on that version versus versus too much on product. Product keeps you busy, but doesn't keep you really moving forward.
Right. Yeah. I think that's so, key, right? You can build a product, but is it really solving a problem? Right. Is it really solving a problem? How do you validate that if this is a real clutch problem or assess that from a market standpoint? And I'll open that to anybody that wants to jump right in.
Yeah, I can go first. So I think a lot of times entrepreneurs think that it's not ready or it's not done. And that's an easy kind of trap to fall into, because you always have to be selling. You always have to be selling your product, whatever it is. If it's not done, if it's in the way of being done, or if it's, right, it doesn't matter what stage it's at, because you're really trying to gauge market interest for whatever it is you're building. And so if you can't, and software is a lot easier because you can kind of tweak it as it's moving through its commercialization phases. But if you're doing hardware or hardware software combination, it's a little bit harder. But for hardware stuff, I mean, you can get pre-orders, you can get pilots established, and yes, a lot of times they'll be free, but you can put an agreement in place that if you achieve certain criteria upon the pilot, that they'd be, your first customer, or they'd order X number of units or whatever, so that it gives you the opportunity to kind of showcase and prove that your product can do what it says that it can do, and then, move from there. So I think if you can't convince a group of people to take your product for free, then that's a big red flag.
Or you can bribe them with tacos, right, Nick?
That's right. That's right. But no, I think it makes a great point. there are so many frameworks out there and so many blog posts about like market fit and talking to customers and learning about what they want and seeing if they want the thing that you're going to be offering. But until they actually have something in front of them to put their credit card in, you can't really validate whether or not they're going to buy it. So getting to that phase as quickly as possible is paramount.
Yeah, no, I love that, right? You get to a point to monetize it. And then what Lewis was talking about in terms of setting a pilot that once you hit certain benchmarks, that cuts in the revenue that starts off and kicks that off. I think that's a very prudent approach. Richard, what have you seen there in terms of tapping into the customer voice on the front end to really validate the market and to understand, hey, this is the approach, this is the way we need to go? Obviously, you're looking at paths and you maybe have 10 different roads you could take to get to product market fit. But how do you approach that?
Yeah, it's a dynamic situation. That perfection trap really is a trap. And I do think that what both Nick and Lewis said is important is is trying to get to revenue, because that's a true clear signal of customer intent, right? Of customer capture. But I also think that in today's world, we have so much technology allows us to get so much more reach, that I don't necessarily think it's always a race to revenue, but it really depends on what you're building, right? And if you focus on internal clarity, then you start to weed out and you leverage the scale of technology in your reach. Then I think that you can weed out noise and find clear signal, and you can kind of build in stealth for a little longer than just going right for revenue. Because there's a lot. I mean, that's definitely a hack that can get you going really, really fast. But it can also, if it's sort of deployed too early, then I think you could crush yourself under the weight of pivoting and course corrections. And asking for money is a true commitment from a client. And pivoting too much with an early client can disrupt loyalty. So it really depends on what you're building. There's not one framework, and I think Nick mentioned there's multiple, or you mentioned there's multiple frameworks to work on, but balancing vision with market reality. I think we have to realize that in the day of short attention spans, that this is a journey. Statistically, I think product market fit isn't found for like 2 years, right? And fundraising, if you're gonna try to reach venture capital, that's a long process, and there will be pivots, and so if you can get those customer insights as, let's say, community or loyalty insights versus customer insights, then there's less of a risk of having them feel betrayed later, or still early on in the journey. So, and I think that, again, now you have more tools, free tools for data analytics. Now AI is leveraging things, but again, you're almost going to need an AI just to weed out the AI noise that's out there. But it's identifying patterns in customer behavior that isn't just surface level, that maybe aren't obvious. And it's harder to get through the digital version versus like what we're doing. When you communicate with someone authentically, you get clarity in that conversation. And it's a little harder to do digitally, but I think if a founder's really in this for the long run, then these are some of the things that they maybe want to think about pre-revenue. And then if you've got it, the signal will become clear. Like when I was doing my IPO, I knew the GFC was coming, but it hadn't hit yet. I knew there were going to be distressed assets to roll up. But that eternal question, buy or build or invest or bootstrap, was front of mind. And I was actually, I was able to create a business service that helped prepare my targets for acquisition. So they paid to be acquired through another company that I was, a third party from, but it was so they paid. So the services they paid. So it works out when you think about it holistically. There's multiple ways to eat that apple. And
I really like that, right? How do you engage so you're building alongside a customer, right? How do you engage, whether with the market research, because then you get the real face-to-face, transparent feedback. I think Nick's got a really great story about building alongside the customer, right? And really get the validation along the way. Any more thoughts there, Nick, in that journey?
That's a great question. Yeah, I mean, it's largely when you're building both for yourself and for, effectively your industry, it's a little bit easier to have access to that. I think too, and maybe we're kind of a weird case in this stance. It's better if you can find ways to double dip or make it a winning proposition, even if the product itself fails. Like effectively, we were building something that whether or not it hit as a product, it was still driving things to other, like our consultancy. Effectively, if the product didn't hit, we still had 10 years off the back of that of folks that were interested in our consulting services because we had this product. For years and years, we had folks come to us to work for us because they had learned how to do the craft on the platform that we had made. All of our meetups that we ran, and we met all these people and cultivated community. Like there were many, many reasons why, even if the product didn't hit, that we still were going to garner some benefit from it. So it was really not for the good of the money or the growth in the beginning, which probably helped garner that community that stuck with us for a long time as we figured all these things out. So yeah, I mean, I guess hyper community focus from the beginning was always what we relied on to find that fit.
Well, yeah. Well, what I liked about that is there's multiple streams, right? So there's a little bit of diversification and hedging in that, right? We can go back and talk a little bit more about the blurred lines there in a few minutes. But even Richard, you talked about offering additional services or complementary services, right? So as you're finding that initial point of traction, how are you monetizing the rest so you can feed your family, throughout the process? So really like that approach. Louis, you want to talk about your initial attraction and how you got that validation within the market?
Yeah, I just wanted to comment on what Richard and Nick said. I think for software companies, people are less patient with errors. With hardware, where you have to see people, you can actually see your customers face to face. If you're transparent about where you are, and then they're choosing to bet on you to deliver something, and then, if you say, hey, if it's not perfect or if it's not working, you're going to do everything to fix it. They'll, as long as you're transparent, they will be forgiving. If you try to deliver something that's not on what you promised, then that's where you can get into a slippery slope, like Richard said, and then you're kind of in a downward spiral. So one thing that's what we did, to your question, Paul, is like I made sure that there was a lot of trust and rapport built with my early customers. And just a quick little, I think, important story. I remember the first maybe 1 or 2, 3 customers, I made a plaque for the group that actually backed our company for accepting these pilots. And we put our kind of mission statement and everything on there and put their names. So like, I made it a celebration so that they could realize how important their contribution to this technology was and its progress. So I think that's important to do, is to recognize your early customers and make them almost like evangelists of your technology, because they're going to be your first references. So that's a critical thing to do. Sorry, did you want me to expand on the early traction or?
Yeah, feel free.
Yeah, I mean, we were, I think it depends on if you're selling B2B or you're selling direct to a person, so direct to consumer. And then our systems were really large. I know they were worth $140,000 plus. So you're talking about a lot of dollars. You're talking about a lot of approvals. In medical, there's a lot of regulatory and safety and compliance that you have to adhere to. So you can never skimp on those things. That's a non-negotiable. So as long as you're following the rules and the compliance and the approvals, getting a pilot was, I think people think when someone says, oh yeah, I want to do a pilot with you or whatever, that it's kind of like a loosey-goosey arrangement, right? And even a free interaction with a technology, if it's a hardware or even a software, you have to legitimize it. I mean, you got to put a a pilot agreement in place. You have to set kind of the rules of engagement. Here's what we're going to deliver. Here's when we're going to try to deliver it. Here's what we're going to do during that time. This is the type of data we're going to collect. We would love to get some sort of PR from this pilot with you. These are all different things you can put into a very simple pilot agreement. And then if you feel like you have a really strong relationship, you can say, if we meet these objectives and it's documented, et cetera, would you be willing to purchase one of these systems when it's commercially ready, let's say. And if you've done a good job building rapport and trust, that should be a pretty straightforward discussion, and that's what they would be expecting from you. So if you don't do that, then they're kind of like, how are they going to bring this thing in here? Or how would we give them access to our systems if it's a software, if we have no sort of legal controls in place to make sure that this doesn't go sideways? So that's a little snapshot of a pilot or early traction.
No, absolutely. I think that's great. And as kind of the chief executive officer, but how did that translate into your first sales? Were you the one who was making those first sales or the negotiations on those pilots?
Yeah. You mean you're the dishwasher, the executive, the finance per, like, especially with companies like that have a lot of R&D and stuff. You can't allow something like that to go sideways. I mean, that'll kill your company. So, yes, I had support, but when you talk about negotiating these agreements, the head person, if you don't have a head, business development or vice president, you have to make sure it's done well, because it's a risk and a reward at the same time. So everything can go wrong, but at the same time, everything go right. So you have to really feel comfortable about that pilot.
Yeah. And then Richard, what's your mentality about you being, initial traction as the chief sales officer, obviously, in addition to the rest of the operations?
I think, well, to just back up for a second, I think that what Nick mentioned, so there's a lot of advice here for founders in general. And I think that, and don't let me forget to get to your question, but there's, if we're really talking about a true startup or a founder's first true startup, right? That brand, he's building a brand around his founder reputation. So that is critically valuable in the long run, even if he pivots, even if he changes. Again, everything that everyone said so far, if he's able to establish himself as as an authority with the right to, he earns the right to win, even if he changes. Business failures are so common, like you said, 9%. So like those failures have value. I learned so much more when a business failed than when it succeeded. When it succeeded, you're kind of on easy street a lot of times. When it's when failures and challenges come up that you dig deep, you dive deep, you have to learn so much. So I think that Nick's point's really, when you're building, that if the product doesn't take off, it still feeds other data points and enhances your brand equity. I think if you learn how to embrace that, I would say that at KKR, we called that a lot of market pull versus market push. And when you're pushing something into the market, hoping that people will adopt, it's an uphill battle, and you start to seek the answers that you're looking for versus listening to market pull, where it's like it's literally pulling you in. And so there's so much there. Again, when you found a solution and you've sold the vision, then your community will be leaning in before you even try to sell them. They'll be, before you launch, they'll be a part of that, right? And so I think that again, I think some of that message is here that these best companies, these winning companies, they don't just launch and hope for the best. They're evolving alongside the customer, like you said. And I think that plays into Thiel's monopoly concept, right? Where you're not just creating a great product, you're creating a category where customers naturally come to you first, hopefully, right? And that's not easy to do, but we all find problems in our daily lives that don't have great solutions, and we very rarely seek out, take that 5 minutes and be like, is this really something? And then, do other people have the same problem? And so this traction isn't really hard. I mean, I think what we're doing at Fertility Innovation Labs is we're not just like launching a product, we're simultaneously creating a data set that's so valuable, whether or not the initial go-to-market of the device is huge. Our strategy, we've doubled down through the strategy on the data itself, which will become an asset, right? So it's not always, again, I think it's not always just about making money. It's about creating sort of long-term market gravity, right? Pull and having some foresight into where markets go, because again, if we're talking technology products, they change rapidly, and there's so many out there. So
I think it's great, right? Like value can be quantified in so many different ways, right? Whether that's a cash flow or whether it's data or whether it's, even customer feedback. And I really like what Nick said in terms of his, go-to-market strategy being kind of a community-led strategy where you, like Richard says, you pull people in and you leverage that gravity of the pull versus trying to, hawk some really good software, right? Like just trying to sell and get that. I was talking to Nick a little bit earlier, and maybe you talk about how your thought about sales and how you felt about sales in your go-to-market.
How we thought about sales. I mean, so we're a bunch of technologists who really lean into the idea that sales is, the used car variety. None of us were trained on how to do that. It was very authentic, I think, because of that. Like people believed what we had to say because we had no idea how to do anything else. So it was very much this is what we're doing. We're doing it out in the open. We're doing so very earnestly and honestly. And, it's a collaborative thing. Like we would take feedback very seriously. We would, everybody would pitch in to support. Everybody would talk directly to customers. So it is very much for a long time, there is no salesperson. There's a bunch of experts that have to talk to people directly and figure this out. And it wasn't until I think 2 or 3 years in that we finally said, okay, we're grown up now, and we need to probably have marketing and sales because we can't continue to grow at the pace we need to be a real company without some of those experts that do that. And so later on, we learned that we're not all used car salesmen when we sell, because that's my day job now. But initially, it was just very much being honest, and in a lot of cases, probably being too honest.
Yeah, that's cool.
One comment, Paul, about the early traction I think I forgot to mention is, even though you're a small company and maybe there's 3 of you on the team or something, that doesn't mean you can't look like a big company, or at least an established company. So your size does not dictate how you represent yourself and your brand. If you haven't taken the time to polish your presentations, your sales materials, your website, your bios, all these little things that just show people that you're serious, then you're just working against yourself.
100%. That's a great point, Lewis.
Good point. So guys, obviously we go to market, we try to get initial traction. You've got to juggle the sales, your community-led approach. You've got how many back-end developers, if it's software and you're building to MVP, or if you're constructing and coordinating all of those, if you're building hardware. How do you complete the juggle? How do you make sure that you don't drop the ball as you're moving forward? Anybody want to take that at a first crack?
Initially, I can for just a second. I don't think it's. I would cover the whole thing, but I would just say for any founders that are really looking at this for their first time, and even for repeat, I honestly didn't find this book until more than halfway into my journey that goes back 20 years. But E-Myth Revisited, that book is fantastic for founders. And I've seen some founders who just think they're above it. They're like, oh, this talks about bake sales or running a bakery or something. Reduce your ego, and really understand that you a lot of times either you have 3 founders and your 3 founders are your biggest enemies, or you yourself. There you go. Boom. It's so good. It's so good. It's just amazing. And it will really, I mean, I've been in deals where I was so frustrated by the founder team and what they were doing. And then that's when I actually found that book. And I was like, unbelievable. It just diagnosed and broke them down to it was like I was living the case study. It was unbelievable. And so it's not going to apply to every single business model, but it's about the founder mindset and about, I think that's what you asked about, the pitfalls of early startups and what's really important and what's not, because we're sold a lot of marketing nonsense and gibberish and business, stuff. And that, I think, breaks it down in a way that is more or less evergreen and truly gets to the key points. And if you follow most of those, your business might not work just because it's not a great product or something. But as far as tactically establishing the foundation, I think that book nails it.
Appreciate the recommendation. I think it's it's interesting to see which processes people follow or gravitate to or had success with. So thanks for the tip there. What about juggling priorities for you, Louis?
So I think what Richard's saying is really important. Is this your first time being an entrepreneur? Yes or no? And if it's yes, you might have never, you could be a young founder. It could be somebody who came from the corporate world. It really doesn't matter where you come from, but when you enter the first time entrepreneur, seat, it is a completely different beast of an experience. And it'll change you. It'll really change you in terms of appreciating, any product, any company or anything, to really understand how you create value and then deliver it and then sustain it. And so I think it's harder for the first time entrepreneurs who are younger, just because I think young entrepreneurs have really innovative ideas that are also, fresh in terms of like new stuff that's going to disrupt the marketplace, just because they're closer to the R&D hubs. Like all the universities are talking about the latest and greatest and the labs and all that other stuff. So they're closer to the ground on innovation than, let's say a grown person, unless they work at a big company and they see, or they work close with R&D. So I think the younger entrepreneurs have a lot of innovation, but they lack a lot in the preparation to be just a leader and an entrepreneur. So you really have to beef up that knowledge base and make sure you read up on these types of books and things like that. If this is your second time, third time going around, I think you already went through the jungle, so you come prepared. How to sense things a little bit easier. Things that are just it's easier, right? And so I think the answer is different from the first time entrepreneur to the second or third. I think first time entrepreneurs, it's going to be a grind. And I remember, because I started my first company while I was still in college. And so I remember, working all day, going to the gym, and then working again till 1, 2 o'clock in the morning. And, when you're bootstrapping before your first round of professional capital and stuff like that, there's a lot of late nights. And you got to do some crazy stuff. Like, some of the more historic stories about, the other founders, and they start in the garage and things like that's real. It's real. People start in their bedrooms, people start in their mom's basement or whatever. Like that's not a joke. That's real. That's real life. So that's for like the first time founders. And then for the second or third time founders, it's like, you have to be more aware of, you can't go into it with an ego, back to what Richard was saying. If you think you're going to win because you've won before, you're so blind that you could be building a big, hairy, mess. And so you really have to be more sensitive, especially if it's a different space, to really audit the space, the market, get a lot of feedback. And you still got to go, the journey doesn't change. It's just, you got to go through the same steps. It's just making sure that, you balance everything, and you might be starting from zero, building no product, no nothing, or you might be joining a group that has, an MVP or a prototype already. And so you really have to take all the puzzle pieces as they come.
Excellent.
Yeah.
Hey, Nick, I know you consult a number of startups and early stage companies on building their MVP. What are some of those what's the go-to guidance that you give them in terms of getting that initial traction on the dev side?
That's a great question. Yeah, I mean, I think the hard part's always going to be going from, it's the gap between the idea and actually having MVP. It's tough to figure out, how do I actually get this developed, and who does it, and how do we either find the funds or find the time or find the expertise to nail that. And so really it's don't spend too much time getting something out there. As Richard kind of talked about, there's a number of reasons why you might want to go stealth for a while. You might just be in an industry or something that's highly regulated that takes a while. But for the most part, depending on what you're building, limit the idea and limit what you're actually trying to achieve in a phase to a thing you can get out in a few months, if at all possible. Like, that's great. Most of the time we're talking founders down from, okay, this year we're going to do this, next year we're going to do this. It's what can we relaunch this quarter? What can we launch next quarter? What can we actually do, without getting into the hole of not putting it in front of people that can validate it and give you feedback and all of that. Like, it's a time thing for the most part, because so many folks that are founding a product for the first time that we talk to, they're 2 years in, they've spent $500,000, they've tried 2 or 3 different dev shops, and they realize now that they're just being too precious with the idea and iterating too much and pivoting before they have any sort of real feedback or validation.
Gotcha. Yeah, I mean, that whole valley of death, scenario, that's something that everybody has to navigate, right? Like, how do you get through that? How do you persevere? Maybe Richard, really appreciate your service. Are there any takeaways from, that ranger mentality of, perseverance and pushing through the valley of death and getting to that point of traction?
Yeah, for sure, and that does touch on another sort of nerve for me, where if you look at that diagram of the there's that euphoria of how it starts, and then you kind of go through that trough of despair, and a lot of people are familiar with that chart, but it's that is the founder journey. You are always, imposter syndrome is real, and questioning yourself is real. How Lewis mentioned that it's part of that. It's where that goes is as I'm thinking about it, I'm literally being overwhelmed with like the different lives that I've lived in doing those journeys, and it can take your words away, because you lived it, and the highs and lows are ridiculous. And I think there's actually some statistics on that, where, if you had a founder, well, if you had a founder who just nailed it right off the bat, chances of them succeeding on a second one are very slim. And somebody who's actually failed and then phoenixed back, there's much higher chances that they're going to succeed, because of what Lewis was saying. It's like, if the first guy, first time, second time, third time, most likely they're going to be adapting, whether they read like the book or not, E-Myth, but like they're most likely, they've realized so many mistakes that they're going to be course correcting themselves. And so I think a lot of that turns into just iterating, right? Whether those are short-term sprints or long-term course corrections or pivots, like the iterating and reflecting back, is super important. I think a lot of early founders will just say, as long as I keep my head down and move forward, I'll make it, and there's a lot to that grit and tenacity. And there's some of that's that ranger speak, where it's like, we just lead the way. We just do it. We take the hardest way. We always succeed, but that's not for everybody at all. Okay. A lot of people need to build resilience through low hanging, simple wins, starting your day with basic things that set you up to succeed. And I think a lot of people take those, they're not even low hanging fruit. It's just like they avoid it because they think it's redundancy in their structure in their day, but it's really just setting up it's like that sales, there's a sales thing where it's like, you get the person, the target, to say yes 3 times. You want your day to start that way. If just the other day, something like 3 things went wrong, and I was like, all right, let's just stop doing stuff for all of a sudden, because there's all of a sudden it was just like this black cloud. And then right after that, a tornado hit in the neighborhood. It was weird. But there's something everyone's framework can be different. And I help a lot of founders at Cambridge University is another area where I advise a lot. And, we don't just look at product there. It's very much about the founder psychology. And I would say it's a little bit more fragile or delicate than, and not meaning that in a bad way compared to the Ranger mentality. Ranger has a super high attrition rate. Most don't succeed, most fail. And even once they make it to regiment, they don't stay a long time, most, because it's just hard. It's just very hard for everyone. But for founders, it's a different thing. But if we see that they're in the weeds and they're doing everything themselves, it's kind of a red flag, right? We want to sort of see an architect mentality where they're structuring their vision, their mission, their values, ultimately what the business will be, in a way that should scale without them. With them for a while, but also without them, because then they're setting themselves up for the CEO mindset, not the COO mindset. And I think when we see that early on, we know we have a winner.
Yeah. No, and I think that, from talking to a lot of VCs, they're looking at and assessing the team, right? And they're not just assessing the team and the makeup and the dynamic of the people, but really that psychology, that mentality of, hey, let's figure it out. How do we iterate? How do we pivot? How do we get to that next stage? Lewis, do you want to talk a little bit about your perseverance through some of those challenges along the way?
Yeah, I mean, one of my advisors, that's one thing we haven't really touched upon is your team and who you are surrounding yourself with. Because without that, the bad days are really not good. You need people to help pick you up and help, just push you along. And if you asked one of my advisors this question, he would say, I remember the day we were on a phone call and you said, I don't care. Like, I'm not stopping unless I get hit by a bus. And he tells this story till today. And, I think that's, what Richard said is correct. I mean, you can't just brute force the thing and you're trying to force something that's not supposed to happen. But there is a fine balance between knowing something about your product and the market that is so right that maybe other people don't understand. That I think even Jeff Bezos says, like, you're somewhat delusional in the beginning and no one believes you. That's real. Like, people won't validate you until you put the thing out there and it's working and it's doing what you said it was going to do. And so you're constantly fighting criticism and your own self-doubt just because you're building something that's new, right? And so perseverance is really, I would say resilience is really important. You'll always have to persevere for things, but can you have resiliency to go the long? It's a marathon. It's not, it's not 1 year, 2 years, whatever. No, it's like you should be prepared for easily 5 years to 10 to make something truly great. And so, I think perseverance, you need that no matter what, but do you have resilience to handle the pressure of criticism and self-doubt, but at the same time, this fire in your belly to know that, hey, I think this can work. And a lot of people think you're delusional, and that's real. So,
passion,
Nick,
fanatical, yeah.
It is passion, right? Nick, did you have one of those moments where people thought you were delusional, or you got some validation that was unexpected at the right time that carried you through some of those biggest challenges you faced?
Yeah, good question. I think we had an early moment where, we had always intended to bootstrap the thing. We were extremely fortunate to have our cake, eat it too, because we had a successful consultancy already that we could pass people back and forth and all of that. But yeah, there was a moment where one of our founders was kind of wined and dined, and there was an organization that we were in contact with that never slid a term sheet across the table, but not so subtly indicated they'd be interested in investing and potentially acquiring a decent chunk of the company. And this was, maybe 6 months into the process. And so I think that was one of those moments where I was like, we're still figuring out what the model is. We're still figuring out how to make this a viable business. But there's already that level of interest. And so we knew, A, we seem to be onto something here. B, it made us have some hard conversations around, it doesn't make sense to take investment. What does that do for you? Like, that's probably a whole nother one of these talks, right? And do I need to take money, and is it going to accelerate us, or is keeping all the ownership and bootstrapping it make more sense at this point? We obviously chose the latter. But yeah, just having those opportunities and having that network to validate even on that kind of a level helps out a great deal.
Well,
yeah, great point.
I love that, right? Like, and it's nice because it's one of these little moments along the way that helps you get to that next step, right? Like, it's what's that next right step. And Edison talks about the thousands and thousands of times he learned from a light bulb that didn't work, right? And took that step forward. But I think back to this perseverance, right? Richard really mentioned how important that team is that you compile, architecting that right team to get more into the strategic, to become that CEO. Nick, you talked a little bit about the blurred lines with the two different people, and you told me something interesting as well about when it was 5 people and then when you were at 50. Maybe you want to talk a little bit more about that.
Yeah, of course. And, uncomfortable shift in seat. I'm somebody who represents, the consulting side. So we had this product business, we had this consulting business. At some point, the lines are too blurred and you don't know anymore who works for what, who's resourcing what, who's actually profitable. And that created all kinds of fun issues over the course of 5 years. I was among the group that enjoyed the consulting and agency side of it. And so when we finally split to figure those things out and to actually, look appropriate for acquisition, because you can't really heap two companies together like that in the way that most of these acquisitions go. Anyway, but yeah, the biggest thing we saw was we had a team that was incredibly talented and was doing all these great things. As Envy went from 15 to 50 with 40 or so of them working on a product, A, it's kind of weird to all sit together. But then B, suddenly now these incredibly talented developers, designers, they're not designing and developing anymore. They're in meetings for 35, 40, 45 hours a week. And so then it's that like the right CTO for 5 people is not necessarily the right CTO for 50 or 500. And so you run into those issues, and it goes back to the money thing we were just talking about. You have to make decisions about when the right time to have the right people in the right seats is. And that's a growth problem for sure.
Yeah, Lewis, what about putting the right team together there?
Yeah, I mean, you need to, like, I think, Richard, you might be able to comment on this. Like, you're going to war, and you got to ask yourself, so who's going to be in the trenches with you, period? Because when things get difficult, you want to have a strong team member or group of them to push through, because that's, it's real. And so you have to, in the beginning, for sure, before you get to 10, those first 10 are really important, because you can't do it all. They're going to have to carry and represent the company to a very high degree. They're going to have a little bit of that entrepreneur mindset to do their core job and maybe a couple other little things here and there. And then things, they say things change at like 10, 20, and like 30. Your company drastically changes. And so, team in the beginning to get you to that 0 to 1 to that, or the first revenues or finishing the product, like they're going to be your executive team, essentially. As you start growing, people are going to look to them because they have all the knowledge and the information that has gotten you there. And then you got to slowly start adding more and more knowledge and expertise. But everyone's always going to lean on them. So they need to be, your fighters for sure.
And Richard, you got brothers in arms. Anything you're looking for specifically in terms of, from an investor standpoint now, I guess from IPO earlier, but from an investor standpoint, is there something that you're looking for, attributes or qualities that you're like, yes, this is something I want to put my money in?
Right. So, no, this is a fantastic question, and it probably could be an hour on its own. This could be a whole masterclass for this one, because Lewis really got me thinking about it a minute ago, and it was when he mentioned teams, and so as a founder, let's say an early founder, bootstrapping, there's the blessing there of having time on your side. And really what he just needs to learn to do, or she needs to learn to do, is protecting themselves and surrounding themselves with only people that are part of the vision, even if they're not really truly part of it. That whole ups and downs and that journey thing. If you're not getting money, so we'll talk about when you get money, or you're preparing to actually get a capital allocation, or going or targeting venture capital or something, that's a little different. But it's sort of a blessing where you have that freedom to, you're not under the pressure, you're not under the gun, you're not in the you're not in due diligence, you're not under this lens. And when I was still now again, I'd already done some things and I'd already been in the industry for a little while. But when I was doing really my first, the startup that I knew would be an IPO. So I had a very specific goal right from day one that this was meant to IPO, right? That's not typically how most of these things start, right? But I was 29 years old, and I had obviously friends, and but literally I only spent time with people that were 55 and above, and they were mentors, they were advisors, but they were friends as well. There's no one under that age at that time was what I needed around me to keep me focused on that goal, on doing an IPO within less than 5 years. It was very targeted. And Lewis had mentioned when we had talked earlier, there's on that journey in particular, I would go to events, family events and things, but like I was in a meeting that entire time. I was present, but not really present. And there's goods and bads to that, but I'm just, I guess in general, when you're not trying to target venture capital, then you have more freedom, but you really need to protect your spirit of as the North Star of the company, right? Yes. You're that CEO, you carry the vision, you carry that torch, and you have to really protect it, because those around you inadvertently that just love you, family, real close friends, they don't have that vision and that spirit with them. They're going to pull you down. They don't mean to, but they just don't see it in the same way that you do, that delusional, fanatical thing that we're talking about. They're not going to have that. And so without that, it's a real threat to the founder. Now, once you're targeting venture capital, or you're trying to raise money, suddenly, again, I think the last part of that is that you also can hire. You're just not under such a time constraint, right? You can hire, you can court, you can learn at your own pace. Suddenly you go for money. You have to have a team that is clear on what the business is actually building. You have people pressuring you to rapidly scale, rapidly make decisions. You have to hire. And if you're not really ready for that as a founder, you're going to make all wrong decisions. And that early team is really important. So if you don't have a great understanding of how to hire and fire quickly and how to protect your equity, then you're really not ready to approach an investor, for sure. But I think that you should be asking yourselves, once you start to build that team a little bit, is the team structured to scale? And understanding that at different points of that scaling isn't the same, 0 to 20, let's say 0 to 20, 20 to 50, 50 to 100. And then let's say 150 to 1,000, your C-suite should change completely. Right. But, and so you have to understand that. And then you have to really ask yourselves, like, are we, what do we really look like under the hood, and not just be, drinking your own Kool-Aid on some of that, and understanding if your core team, which could be C-suite or just founder team, if there are competing priorities, and is your message and your team cohesion, founder team cohesion, is it attractive so that an outside investor could understand it and your business model and see how they're aligned within 5 minutes or less? So it's two completely different topics here, but right. That's how I'd present that.
No, I think that's great, right? You take a look at the process of what it takes to put it together, figuring out your priorities, but really maintaining that focus to put the right team in place so that you can persevere through. Any last thoughts around the table this morning, gentlemen?
I'd seen some comments I was going to try to briefly in the chat. I don't know if I should wait till after, or we have time, or hit them
feel
now.
free to interact with the comments on the side.
No, I didn't even know we had comments.
No.
I see a bunch of
A number of
questions.
them were great comments. Actually, there's one final thought. If you want to chime in, I know we're over here a second, but how does AI headcount, come into that makeup of your team and your people? I think that's a really interesting question that came out of the chat.
I'm sorry. It was, how is it affecting headcount?
Yeah, in terms of your team makeup and your people that you're deploying the AI headcount.
In the AI first, I'm hiring less, scaling more, and I think that enterprise companies have all announced that they're as they let go of their lowest 10%, they're not rehiring them. They're letting AI take them over. I'm seeing AI replace jobs in all of everywhere I look in my work as well as my consulting work. It is actively replacing jobs.
Yeah, especially repeatable jobs, customer service, even coding. I mean, it's taking that repeatable workload for sure.
Well, gentlemen, really appreciate your time, your insights on 0 to 1 this morning. And for anybody out in the audience that has additional questions, feel free to reach out directly to these gentlemen, their expertise. We've got a wealth of resources here in Central Florida. I really thank Bob Reed for his support with Starter Studio. Obviously, they do a great service to the community for people that are looking to get traction as they are getting from 0 to 1. If you need a process and you need a coach along the way, they have a great accelerator option to consider as well. But thank you so much for your contributions to the Central Florida Orlando Tech community, and we'll look forward to seeing you next month, second Tuesday every month.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, guys.
Cheers.
Thanks, Paul. Bye, guys.